Okay, well, that's 2 minutes past, so I am going to get started. Hello, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the third in our series of exclusive online talks for the Kent Archaeological Society. We want to bring the wonders of Kent history and heritage direct to your screens from the comfort of your armchairs and living rooms. And we have added even more excellent speakers to our lineup, stretching into 2025. So more on that later. Hopefully, tonight we'll go without any technical issues and we'll run completely smoothly. Please bear with us if there are any issues. We will try and get them fixed. Thankfully, Super Jacob is on hand to fix any challenges which may arise. So fingers crossed, none of that. So we'll start with the housekeeping, just to kick us off. The talk will last around an hour, after which we have time for questions, if you have any. Please keep yourselves on mute with your cameras off, please, so that we can concentrate on our speaker and the presentation. During the question and answer session, you can either use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you when it's your turn to ask your question. Or if you prefer, you can type your questions into the chat box and we will read those out for you. I hope it goes without saying, but please be courteous and polite to our speaker and to each other. We're all friends here. We will be recording the session and it may be posted to our video channels in the future, but no personal data will be shared. And if you ask a question but would prefer it not to be included, just send us an email and we will make sure that that happens. So, on to our speaker. It is my great pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague and the curator of our society, Andrew Ward. Andy completed his undergraduate degree in ancient history at the University of Kent and his master's degree in heritage at the University of Wales Trinity St David. He spent 2 years volunteering with the Kent's Finds Liaison Officer, Joe Armott, recording all the marvellous treasures discovered here in Kent. He worked as a historic environment record assistant for our near neighbours in East Sussex. And of course, most recently, he has been the curator for the Kent Archaeological Society, doing incredible work to understand our collections, organise, catalogue and preserve our treasures and drive our society goal to bring the history and heritage of Kent to everybody, especially by engaging with our members and the wider public at every opportunity, like today. Andy is blessed with a seemingly unlimited cosmos of collected knowledge and more historic outfits, replica weapons, some of which he makes himself, snazzy waistcoats, and cool gaming circles than anyone else I know. Alongside, much to my chagrin, probably the coolest beard in KAS. Tonight, Andy's going to be discussing the Anglo-Saxon Ozengell Collection. The Society purchased over 1,700 items from the collection in December 2022 when they were put up for auction. And Andy's been working on cataloguing, curating, and researching the collection. He's going to take us on a journey of its initial discovery, its contents, and how the Society became involved in its preservation. So, Andy, over to you.
Okay, let me just start my presentation. Okay, right. Can everybody see my presentation?
No.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
How about now?
Still no. Jacob, are you seeing it?
It should.
Literally just tested it.
We did.
It was perfect.
I'll try to reclaim Andy and then I'll make you host again.
Okay. The technical difficulties are starting at the start of my presentation, not halfway through. Right. Is that any better?
Maybe not. Still seeing your delightful face.
I have a feeling I know what is causing it. Let's try this. Right. Yeah, I know what's causing it. Help if I click share screen, wouldn't it?
There you go.
There we
Perfect.
go. That's a good start. Right. Okay, so after, let me hide that presentation so I can see myself. There we go. So after some minor technical difficulties, welcome everyone. As Craig has very kindly said, I'm Andy Ward. I'm the curator for the Kent Archaeological Society. And I'd like to thank Craig for such a sterling introduction. And as Craig has mentioned, this is one of our series of online lectures, and hopefully you will join us for many more. So, for those of you who don't know who the Kent Archaeological Society are, I'd like to just run through a brief introduction. We were founded in 1857, shortly after Surrey in 1854 and Sussex in 1846. Now, in the 21st century, we are a charity incorporated organisation, CIO, with our aim being to bring the past to the present for everyone. We have around 1,300 members, and if you aren't already a member, we would highly recommend considering joining us. And you can get involved in some of the volunteer projects that we run, our excavations, access to our society library. The society is based at Maidstone Community Support Centre, but our library, which Craig very well runs, is open to members and is accessible at Maidstone Museum, who also house around 4,000 of our objects on a long-term loan. And we are hoping to make our library and our collections more accessible to a larger audience in due course. The KAS is primarily a voluntary organisation, but it is run by a management team made up of paid members of staff who then report to the Board of Trustees. So, the matter at hand, the Anglo-Saxon cemetery, what it is and where is it? To many, the site is known as Ozengell or Ossendon Grange, which is how it was referred to by Hasted, where he placed it around 2 miles from Ramsgate. When it was visited by the antiquarian Charles Roach Smith in the 19th century, it was bounded by Canterbury Road, the Ramsgate and Deal railway line, and on the west by an area known as Holland or Holland's Bottom. According to David Perkins, who excavated the site in the 1970s and 80s, the Canterbury Road, or the A253, was anciently known as Dunn Street. Now, according to Charles Roach Smith, the area was known as the Butts, which may possibly be a reference to upstanding grave mounds or barrows during the 19th century or earlier, or potentially related to Sunday archery practice. It's more likely the barrow idea, but I quite like the archery one as well. So in more recent years, the Trust for Thanet Archaeology, led by Jez Moody, have updated the location of the graves as their exact location wasn't concrete. This has then been added to the Kent Archaeology Society's online map of archaeological features, which can be found on our website. The descriptions given for the cemetery places it west of the A256, which you can see on the screen there. If I use my mouse correctly, which you can see coming through here, the Hayne Road. However, as you can see on this map, the more modern map, it in fact lies on the eastern side. As I mentioned, the location for the Saxon cemetery was incorrectly marked closer to the site of the railway spoil. And the railway plays quite a key part in the story of this site. The reason for this appears to be that some of the finds were recovered when some spoil slipped during a storm, leading to a misassociation with this area. But interestingly, only in the 1949 to 1973 map from Ordnance Survey do we see mention of Roman remains being found, which you can see. So here is the 1888 to 1915 map from Ordnance Survey, which marks the Saxon cemetery here. This is the kind of revetment for the railway line. And then you have that same location shown on this 1830s to 1880s map. And then here is where we get the 1949 to 1973 map, showing the Anglo-Saxon burial ground and Roman remains found. And it's just off from Ozengell Grange. The scheduled area, so part of the Ozengell Cemetery is a scheduled ancient monument, and that scheduled area is south of Ozengell Farmhouse, which is just up here, and it covers this area to the south of the railway line, extending kind of to this corner towards the power station. And that was put in around the 80s, kind of 83, 84. And it ascends to the corner of the Hain Road roundabout and up towards the housing estate on the right, which is the first phase of the Marston Green development. And some people closer to that area may be aware that Marston Phase 2 has been proposed for this area here, which obviously lies outside the scheduled monument area. So, the site itself and the excavations. The first indication that there was something interesting below the ground at Ozengell was when the Ramsgate to Deal railway line was being cut in 1846. At this point, some Roman and 50 to 80 early medieval graves were discovered. Most of these finds were sold off by enterprising railway navvies who realised that some of these grave goods could get them quite a lot of beer money. And then eventually William Henry Rolfe Esquire of Sandwich stepped in and secured the area of the graves. Now, Rolfe's excavations recorded up of 100 graves, with 13 of them being fully opened, as scientifically as they could be at that time, and these were seen by Charles Roach Smith. And you can see some of the grave goods here. The finds from 1846, those not sold off by workmen, ended up in the Mayer Collection, World Museum, Liverpool. They were initially thought to be lost during World War II bombing of Liverpool City Museum, but thankfully they were found. But they aren't currently on display. They are installed, but you can search their website for more details of those, which is where this keystone garnet brooch is located. Jumping forward 120 years, 7 further graves were discovered during pipe trench installation, which is reported in Archaeologia Cantiana in volume 84. And the finds from this included a number of spearheads, a weaving sword or weaving baton, and copper and alloy and ivory items. And these are now in Ramsgate Public Library, although again, they're not on display at the moment. They were identified by Sonia Chadwick Hawkes as being part of the main cemetery, despite the location of the main burials being 600 metres east on Ordnance Survey maps. Between 1977 and 1982, a series of excavations were carried out by the Thanet Excavations Group, the Isle of Thanet Archaeological Unit, and the Thanet Archaeological Unit, or the Trust for Thanet Archaeology Unit. It is this collection which will be the focus of my talk today. Excavations in 1977, led by Dr. David Perkins of the Thanet Archaeological Unit, uncovered 87 graves, which are the most illustrated ones we have currently, and around 230 graves were excavated during that entire period. Reportedly, a number of graves had been previously destroyed but unrecorded during construction of the Nethercourt Farm housing estate, 500 metres east of the Lord of the Manor. And there were other excavations in the 70s by the Thanet Archaeological Unit, where some earlier graves were discovered. And then there was a further training excavation run by the Isle of Thanet Archaeological Society and Trust for Thanet Archaeology between 2012 and 2013, led by Nigel McPherson Grant, looking at more of the prehistoric barrows that are in the area. So how do we spot cemeteries without digging? In the summer of 1974, the landowner, David Steed, who I think I spied in the chat there, noticed lush green patches of grass measuring 6 foot by 2 foot. And these parch marks, these are more lush areas of green, which result from deeper soil that allow the roots to delve further and grow taller compared to their surrounding landscape. And archaeologists use these marks to spot features just like those visible on Google Earth, Sorry for the red line there, not sure how that's arrived. But you can see here, these are some of the prehistoric barrows which were excavated early in the 70s. This one, if I remember right, is Barrow 4. And then in this image here, you'll see a number of circular features spreading through this field. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice these archaeological evaluation trenches, which result from Canterbury Archaeological Trust's work in that area. So some of the graves and prehistoric barrows have been affected by ploughing, while a small number of the excavated graves in 1977 appeared to have been disturbed during or shortly after their interment. 36 of the 87 graves found in 77 appeared to be disturbed, making up about 44% of the graves. But research currently suggests no pattern to these apparent cases of reopening. So, the Ozengell Collection. In 2022, the KAS were made aware that circa 1,700 objects belonging to the Anglo-Saxon Ozengell Collection, incorrectly described as a hoard in some reports, was being auctioned through Rosebery's in London. And this collection represented the finds from the 1977 to 1982 excavations carried out by the Trust for Thanet Archaeology, then the Thanet Archaeological Unit, under David Perkins. Around 230 graves were recorded, with many of them containing grave goods. And the cemetery was dated at the time to the 6th to 7th century AD, although the Anglo-Saxon in Kent excavation database places the entire span of the cemetery from 475 to 725 AD. And there'll be more on this shortly. Unfortunately, other finds from the collection, including a claw beaker pictured here, were sold in 2011, which is obviously the entire prerogative of the landowner. The remaining 1,700 objects were held on loan at the Powell Cotton Museum in Birchington from 1983 to 2010. These were then returned to the landowner when the museum went through a process of returning non-accessioned material. And KAS were made aware that these items were going up for sale, and they stepped in to ensure that the collection remained whole and stayed within Kent. And it's now been my job to catalogue, conserve, and explore this wonderful collection. But it is important to raise that this site is one of many early medieval cemeteries which Stuart Brooks and Sue Harrington describe as having undergone collection trauma due to the many different excavations that have taken place, the antiquarian investigations, more modern ones, which haven't necessarily resulted in complete records in the way that we would like today. Here are some of the finds, the photographs courtesy of Rosebery's. The collection, as well as containing items of iron and copper and silver, included 6 pottery vessels, including this Bronze Age accessory cup here, or incense cup, excavated from the Lord of the Manor Barrow 4. And you can read more about that particular item in the recent Archaeologia Cantiana volume 145, which has recently gone out to members. So the finds. The finds held within the collection provide evidence of the vast trading and influence network that the Kingdom of Kent had in the 6th and 7th centuries AD. Objects including garnets originating from Sri Lanka, jewellery styles with Frankish and Merovingian influence, and potentially other examples as well. They all form part of the jewellery and goods that were deposited with the dead when they were buried. And Dr. Andrew Richardson, who's one of my predecessors and an expert on this cemetery and Anglo-Saxon cemeteries in general, when the KAS were looking at purchasing this collection, wrote this really quite eloquent statement that this cemetery dates primarily to the 6th and 7th centuries AD, when Kent was one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the British Isles, able to draw on extensive international networks that brought exotic goods and materials from across Europe and as far as the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The finds in the collection reflect this rich heritage, with high-quality jewellery manufactured in East Kent, found alongside imported goods from Europe, Africa, and Southern Asia. So it provides a really good sense for us about how interconnected the early medieval world was, and particularly how interconnected Kent was, given its location so near to the continent. The collection was initially catalogued by Rosebery's, but this was primarily to serve the function of putting the items up for auction. When I joined the Society in 2023, it was my task to fully catalogue the collection and process the conservation estimate we had been given by CSI Sittingbourne. And this estimate had initially been put together by my predecessor, Dr. Elizabeth Blanning. A very quick breakdown of the collection was given at the start of the project, numbering around 582 objects. The breakdown now is much larger, totaling about 741. Obviously, this leaves a rather large disparity between 1,700 objects and 700. Now, this may be down to how the smaller objects have been counted in the past, but what we're hoping is that once all the objects are back from conservation and repaired where possible, we should be able to match up each of the written excavation records that we have with that of the physical object. But you can just see some of the examples of what we've already established. So, for example, the initial breakdown is this one here on the left. So you'll see that we had 300 beads. We now know there to be 422. Quite a big increase in numbers. Same with things like the shields and fittings, they've increased. Our spear count has increased. Our brooch count has increased as things that weren't necessarily identified at the beginning, we've gradually learned more about. So site phases, as I mentioned earlier, the primary area of the site is the 6th to 7th centuries AD, which is reflected by the majority of the grave goods, but we do have evidence of earlier phases within the site. So work carried out by the Trust for Thanet Archaeology and Dr. Sue Hamilton and Stuart Brooks from University College London, we now have a phase plan of part of the Anglo-Saxon cemetery spanning the late 5th to early 8th century. So you can see phase 1 here, which was the 1977 excavation carried out by David Perkins. And then you have phases 2 and 3. So that runs the years 1980 to 1982, which covers this area here. And this is the railway cutting for the Ramsgate to Deal railway line, Canterbury to Deal railway line. And then the old Hayne Road coming through here. So the first phase covers 475 AD around about, and then it increases to 525, 575, 625, all the way up to 725 AD. So it's a really long-lived, long-spanning cemetery site. So some of the objects. And, oh, I've lost my hosting there, Jacob. Thank you. Right, can you all see the screen still?
Yep.
Yeah, great, thanks. So yes, as I was saying, we have a number of very high quality objects, like for example, this garnet keystone brooch, which I have here, which if I just turn my camera back on, you will be able to see me, hopefully. Oh, can't because you're seeing my screen, that's why. I will show this at the end then when we're doing the question and answers, that's probably easier. So yes, the cast gilt, silver and garnet keystone brooch. Originally, we thought this might be an Avent type 3, and Avent did a whole typology of these Kentish brooch types. But Joe, on further inspection, thinks this might actually be a type 2 or 3 transitional example, which is really exciting and interesting, dating to between 550 and 575 AD. And the reason we think that is because the zoomorphic elements which are these here. You'll have to take my word from it. They are representing animals. On type 2 brooches of this style, you usually get one zoomorphic image in between two garnets. In type 3 brooches, you get double, so you get two zoomorphic elements, but usually they're rotated 90 degrees. So we've got a bit of a mix of styles going on in this one object. The garnets themselves most likely originated in Sri Lanka or somewhere in the Indian Ocean, and then they've been traded through the continent before entering Britain through Kent. The white paste in the center here, what it seems to be on close inspection that Joe looked at under the microscope is likely that's actually a later replacement for an earlier either shell or glass that would have been in place there. The reason we know this is the paste itself actually sits proud of the fitting, and it should sit quite snugly, but it seems to have actually just been kind of forced into place. And another really interesting element on this garnet brooch is this hole that you see in the right-hand corner. I thought this was later post-depositional damage, or even a deliberate piercing to place a hole through it for wearing it in a different way. But Joe is actually fairly certain that this is potentially a casting flaw, because the gilding that you'll see all around the edge, that is actually placed over the edges of these holes. So if it was later deposition, you'd see damage around that gilding. The fact it is there in place suggests it was there from the very beginning. We also, on the back, is really interesting, is we still have the iron pin that's corroded into place. And due to this, most importantly, we have mineral preserved organics on the reverse, where the iron pin has corroded and preserved evidence of the textile. And this is something that I'm hoping to get looked into further, as we may be able to tell the exact weave found on the clothing that this brooch was once attached to. So this brooch would have been placed on the clothing prior to burial, and then the corrosion has preserved that organic material. And it'd be really interesting to see what kind of clothing the person buried in was wearing at the time. You'll also notice that most of the garnets are broken in some way. And according to Joe's research, this damage actually seems to have taken place before the garnets are even fitted. So they're actually placed into the frame broken, but we don't know why that is. That's still quite unclear. But these kind of research projects by subject experts are extremely important to the KAS, and also to the history of the collection. And we want to be able to learn more about these objects now that they are in our care, and share that information with the wider public and academics and society members. So at the end of this, I will get my video up and show you the brooch in more detail. Now, as archaeologists, we all know the joy of finding something buried in the ground and learning it's older than your culture and seeing it in a museum, or in some cases, personal collections. And this joy of finding something historic was clearly shared by the Anglo-Saxons as well. In the collection, we have a number of possibly reused or curated or imported objects, including this 7th century Gabachon inlaid pendant, which is this one here, which is a Hayworth type PE9-BI. For those artifact nerds out there that will be really interested with that. And a really interesting element to this is on the back of the pendant is a small hole, which potentially is being used to allow for escaping adhesive when the garnet was placed into the mount itself. And the only other place that we have that example of that technology, which you can just about see in this lower image here, that little hole there, the only other place we have that is on some of the items in the Staffordshire hoard. So that kind of shows the level of goldsmithing that we are getting in this area of Kent. And these items are still being debated as whether they are Kentish or whether they are Frankish in origin. The central object you can see here is a Macreath British plate brooch dating from 200 to 350 AD. It's a Roman brooch with millefiori decoration. Now, potentially, this is a curated object, so an object that an Anglo-Saxon person has found, kept because of its beauty, because of its age, maybe not knowing what it is, but keeping it because of its aesthetics. Or, as we know from the earlier 19th century, there is Roman activity in the area. So it could be an intrusive object within the grave, but we'll only really know that when we start looking more closely at the grave plans that we have and understanding where on the body or within the grave this was found. If it was found kind of on the body, it's suggestive more of a deliberate curation and placement. If it's found within the fill of the grave, then potentially it's intrusive. We also have another Roman item, which is this Roman amphora strap end, dating to about 350 to 450 AD. On the original files that were provided to us, it was just recorded as a copper object. But luckily, when me and Elizabeth Blannon were looking at this for the temporary exhibition in Maidstone, we both know exactly what this was and were able to confirm it is a Roman amphora strap end. And so this would have sat at the end of a Roman legionnaire's leather belt, basically. And finally, we have this small inlaid glass Frankish brooch dating to the 5th or 6th century AD, but possibly as early as 475 AD. Now, for those of you from IOTAS who have seen this talk in person, you might remember that we thought initially that this might be a Iberian Visigothic brooch because they have very similar style brooches. But Joe is fairly confident now that this is Frankish in origin, given the colours used and the cloisonné decoration used on it. So I'd just like to say thank you to Joe for producing such a useful review of these garnet items. And these will feature in our collections management system for all our collections, but specifically for Ozengell, where we'll be able to add more and more research as and when that research is carried out. So an interesting discovery. One of the spears from Ozengell from grave 112 contained a very small but very interesting addition. And it was only during close examination of the collection that we've spotted some of these more interesting elements. Obviously, we have the mineral preserved organics that I mentioned on the brooch, and we have that across the collection. But one of my personal favourites is this small item on one of the spearheads from, as I said, grave 112, which is this item here. This small bow and arrow shaped mark, it's extremely small. I mean, it's really hard to spot in this wider picture. You can just about see there, and how it's managed to survive the laminating iron is, very lucky for us as archaeologists, because it could quite easily have been lost over time. This would have been added to the iron spearhead once the metal was cold and forged. Channels would have been carved into the blade, and then the non-ferrous inlay, in this case, we think it's gold, although we haven't had it checked with XRF or SEM to be 100% sure, would then be hammered into place. The exact reason for these marks is much debated. They could be maker's marks or some form of apotropaic or magical mark. So other examples of these have been found across Britain and across Kent, including Buckland in Dover, where they had a bow and arrow, but different to our one, and a clashing shield wall, which was found on one spearhead. They were on both sides of that item. And then also from Sarr, famous cemetery at Sarr, and currently on display in the new Archaeology Lives in our Landscape Gallery, we have the sword blade, which has an inlaid sword blade on it, just here. Now, why have a sword blade on a sword? It could be a magical mark giving your blade more striking strength, less risk of shattering, that sort of thing. Bow and arrows potentially representative of giving your throw more accuracy or something along those lines. The shield wall being about the spear being able to smash through defenses. We will never know. These are all subjective ideas. There is a thought that these are potentially maker's marks, something which a workshop would stamp into their blades to show it's their work. The problem with that is that almost every example that we have are completely unique. So there's no standard style across every example. They are all individual, which for a maker's mark would be pretty useless. You know, you want something that is consistent, that people can recognize. For example, the famous Uthbert early medieval swords, which carry the Uthbert name and are, bar a few which might be later forgeries, are mostly the same style, which, you know, shows a tradition spanning more than 300 years. Now, the way these would be made is non-ferrous or non-iron inlays, as I said, would be sunk into channels, carved out by chisels to hold the wire in place, and then hammered into place. But inlays made, because inlays made from materials other than iron could be placed into the finished weapon. So the sword blade would be cold, you chisel it out, hammer in the inlay. If you wanted to put in iron or pattern welded inlays, these have to be placed when the blade is hot, when you're still in the forging process, because otherwise you're going to create a weakness in the blade and the iron is going to be at different temperatures and then it will potentially shatter. One of the major problems with the Ozengell collection was the use of polyurethane foam. This foam quickly yellows and begins to degrade, releasing harmful gases that can damage both people and objects. The foam in most boxes was completely disintegrating, getting trapped in the crevices of corroded objects. And thankfully, these have now been, or in the process of being, carefully removed under microscope by a wonderful team of volunteers at CSR Sittingbourne. So in 2023, we appointed CSR Sittingbourne and Dana Goodburn-Brown and her team to conserve the entire collection. The objects had been previously conserved by the Ancient Monuments Laboratory and the Institute of Archaeology. So we do have some conservation records, so we know what previous treatments have been carried out. And the polyurethane foam and the pink silica gel, these were, you know, the height of conservation at the time. We now know different, we use different materials, and so it's right that we're now starting to change those and repack them. So as I said, they were mostly packed in yellowing polyurethane foam. And not only does this off-gas, which potentially harms the objects when they're in their boxes, but they're also slowly disintegrating, getting stuck in all of the delicate, intricate objects, the laminating iron, and being really a massive nightmare. So the entire collection is going to be repackaged in grave order. Previously, they were kind of placed together based on year that they were excavated. We're going to be placing them in grave order, which will make research a lot easier. And they're going to be placed in conservation appropriate materials. The pink silica gel that was used at the time, we no longer use. These examples being from the 80s, they're no longer absorbing the moisture and protecting the metalwork. But pink self-indicating silica gel has also been deemed as carcinogenic. So really not something that volunteers or myself or researchers need to be spending any length of time around. And you'll see one of the volunteers there, Laura Jane, who I think I saw in the chat as well, cleaning some of the objects under microscope, because that is how fine some of these polyurethane fragments have become, that you need a microscope in order to actually remove them carefully. So these are just some of the activities that the team at CSR Sittingbourne have been undertaking for us. Much of the ironwork in the collection was beginning to delaminate, where layers of iron begin to fall away due to the rust. And these are strengthened with a chemical compound, which you can see being injected here, to ensure their stability into the future. And all of the volunteers in the team have had the chance to examine the objects in person, checking the documentation that we have was present and correct and for the right object, seeing whether an X-ray had previously been taken, because some of these objects have been X-rayed, and then begin the phase of rebagging and repackaging into correct material. So these are some of the packages. So they would often have an ancient monuments laboratory label giving you the photo number, the X-ray number, the grave, the small find, the date of excavation. This is the lab number, these K numbers for the Ancient Monuments Laboratory. And then we have some which are for the Institute of Archaeology as well. And you can see more of the volunteers here checking the documentation under one of Dana's interns, and also checking the X-ray. Some X-rays have been taken by the team, and then some we already had. And so, yeah, it's a really useful project having these volunteers in place. The hard work of the dedicated volunteers and staff at CSR Sittingbourne has meant that more of the objects are now in new packaging, stable and suitable for display and further research. We started off with about 59 boxes containing all of the items in the collection, and we have got through nearly probably 65–70% of them. Currently the spears are undergoing work and a few other littler items, and then we'll be kind of on the last home stretch, which would be really good to get these all done. And without the work of the volunteers, it would have been a long and drawn out process to make use of the collection. While it's important that the Society secures the collection for future research, so stabilising material so that it will last another 150 years, we also need to carry out conservation work to ensure that we can use these objects now for research, for display, for education, and all sorts of these ideas that we have around the collection. This is, of course, a costly endeavour, and funding will be needed to secure all the materials, staff time, packaging items, and ongoing treatments for the future. And we're also planning to create ongoing projects around the collection, which will enable us to secure grants from a wide range of organisations. So do keep an eye on our website, and all our updates, that's where they will go. Prior to the collection coming into our possession, some of the Ozengell collection had been on display at the Powell Cotton Museum in Birchington and Quex Park until about 2010. Since then, it has not been on display until the Society were able to arrange for a temporary exhibition at Maidstone Museum. This display ran for 6 months in 2023, ending in December. And other elements of the collection have recently gone on display at CSR Sittingbourne, which you can see here. It's located in the Forum Shopping Centre in Sittingbourne. And they've been showcasing not only the completed objects, but those which are still undergoing conservation treatment. And it's really great to have this display not too far from their location of origin, but it is hoped that we can provide further displays in due course, ideally on the Isle of Thanet itself. Most recently, we have been pleased to be joined by a university placement from the University of Reading, Holly, who is working on illustrating all of the Society's collections, and this includes illustrating more of the Ozengell collection. Illustrations were made of the first 1 to 87 graves that David Perkins excavated in 1977, which is what you can see here. This is the Keystone Garnet brooch I showed you earlier, illustrated for basically ready for publication. And illustration is a bit of a dying art, and so we're really keen to be encouraging this new student to get involved and put the work together, which you can see just in the bottom here the different scales of the keystone garnet brooch being done again, and Holly measuring up the different elements of the brooch there. What we hope to do is illustrate, as well as illustrate all of them, is to illustrate graves from the finds from graves from 87 through 230, which will then give us a complete illustration of the entire cemetery collection. And then hopefully through the study of these items in more detail, we will be able to identify exactly where they came from in the graves, even though we don't have the full finds list at the moment. So the next steps. This has been a very broad overview of the journey of the Ozengell conservation and its history, but there's still a little way to go. We need to complete the conservation work and repackage the collection by grave. This will allow us to more easily produce objects for researchers, for academics, for digitization projects, that sort of thing. We want to arrange research into individual object types, as well as the overall assemblage. So we want to get research that looks at Ozengell's place within wider Anglo-Saxon cemeteries, the individual brooch types, because we have quite a number of brooches that are unusual for our area. We want to digitize the entire collection for placement on the KAS website. And this is part of our wider aim of creating a collection management system for the Society, whereby you can see exactly what we hold, view images, 3D models, and request access for research. And we also have in the works, still undergoing discussion, proposed joint project with the Trust for Thanet Archaeology to digitise the paper archive for the 1977 to 1982 work, because they have the majority of the paper archive, and we really want to try and work with them to digitise this, to make it more accessible, and so that we can match up with the physical objects and the illustrations. So these are just some of the references. If anybody wants any of these, you can email the Society and I can send them over to you, if anybody wants to do any further reading. What we'll do then is thank you very much for coming and joining us. I will give a quick showcase. I'll close the presentation and do a quick showcase of some of the objects I've got with me, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions people may have. Thanks. I'm going to stop sharing. Jacob, can you make me host again, please?
And you should be host now,
Oh,
but I will reclaim if you want, and then make you host again.
Yeah, it's just so that I can. There we go. Can everybody see me?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Right, let me unblur my background. So this is the keystone garnet brooch, and I don't know how well this is going to work. There we go. So as you can see, there are the three very beautiful garnets that would have originally come from Sri Lanka or the Indian Ocean. You've then got the gilded surface all around the top, and it's silver gilt. So on the back, you see the silver and the corroded elements of the pin bar and the textiles, which won't show up very well on a video. This works better in person, but these objects will be coming on display with us whenever we do our outreach days, and I'm more than happy to wax lyrical about them. The other brooch that we have, which I didn't actually show in my presentation, but is on the main screen, is this one here. So this is a chip carved decorated disc brooch with kind of animalistic intertwined figures around its edge. And there's a really interesting story with this brooch. This is the original one. This is the 7th century disc brooch. There is a replica disc brooch, which was made at the same time during the excavation. We're not entirely sure. And at some point, Oh, let's just see Joe's in there. I hope you mean this one, Joe, or the other one. That's the back of the garnet disc brooch. If Joe means this one, that's the back. Very plain. Yeah, a very, very plain brooch. But the replica that was made, very clearly replica. It's made out of a silver clay of some form. For some reason, that was identified as the real one. And then at some point, some beads were attached to it with an iron strip, and we're not entirely sure why. And yeah, it's quite an interesting object. But this disc brooch is actually the one which eventually became the Isle of Thanet Archaeological Society's logo. So for any IOTAS members out there, you will recognize that very regularly. And then, yeah, that's kind of my presentation done, unless there are any questions. And Craig, if you want to liaise with that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andy. That was amazing. What a collection, what a site, and how lucky we are to have such an amazing collection at the Society in our care. So I'm going to jump straight into the questions because we already have some. Anyone has any questions, please throw them in the chat box and I will get to them as we go. So I'm going to start here. Jules has asked a few questions, so I'll do them in bits. The first two are, how does the hole relate to the pin? I presume that was in one of the earlier.
Is that for the cabochon pendant or for the garnet disc brooch?
I'm not entirely sure.
If it's the pin, it'll be the garnet disc brooch, which so I don't know if it will show very well on here. So here is the attachment point for the pin. So the pin would come through here. The top of the pin is here. Joe Armitt, as he's in the chat, will correct me if I'm talking complete rubbish. But then this is the foot where the pin would rest, or the pin rest. Hopefully that answers your question, Jules. You are more than welcome to email me if you have any more in detailed questions that I can't answer here.
And the other question there was, do you know if the textile is cellulose or animal fiber?
I don't know at the moment. That is one of the questions we would love to get answered at some point.
Joe A has said, I don't think this is a question. I think it's just it says, I would say I'd like to get the SEM at CSI on the whole to be certain of my assertion on the gilding before anyone calls me out.
Yeah, that's fair, and it is something that we will definitely want to do.
I'm going to go to Corinne. Do you know what the adhesive was made from on the pendant?
No, that again would be something that potentially under an SEM microscope we might be able to see if there's any adhesive still there, or any residue of that adhesive, and then test it from there. But at the moment, no, we don't. It's pure conjecture how they would have done it. But it would have been probably, it would have been natural. It would have been animal fat or a tree derived product.
Jules, oh yes. Also, so Nicholas asked how to access the KAS online map of archaeological features across the county that you mentioned, but I think that Jacob has put a link in the chat there under that question, so you should be able to get onto it from there.
Yes, yeah. If the link is in there, that's great. If not, yeah, go on our website. You'll see resources, map, and then I think, if I remember correctly, because I was looking at it this morning, it's the second or third map down.
Thank you. Jules asked, on the inlaid pendant, is the stone a cabochon or flat?
It is a cabochon. Yes, it probably doesn't show well in the picture, but I don't. Yeah, it is it is a cabochon. It is sitting bulbously.
And how do we know the glass is inlaid and not enamel?
On the Keystone Garnet one, I will bow to Joe Armett's better knowledge of these, that they are inlaid garnets rather than enamel. So that's a very cheating answer.
Joe A, who I think is Joe Armett, is that right?
Yeah, that will be. Oh, I think they're referring to the Frankish bridge. Oh, that would be this one. So yes, we can see. You can't see very well in this picture, but they are very thin, broken layers of glass rather than enamel. But again, this would be something that some scientific testing or viewing it under a very high-powered microscope would be able to confirm for definite. So everything I've said in terms of what these objects are and how they were made is based on what we know of similar object types, but can only be confirmed by further research.
Thank you. Joe has asked, would you be thinking of producing a catalogue and similar like Bifrons had published in a journal? Also, would that publication, if it would happen, include the traumatized material that has left the county through sale or museum acquisition?
Yes, so I would love to make a catalogue of the Anglo-Saxon collection. I'd love to do another, George Payne style 19th century catalogue like we have for all our 19th century material or things that are in the museum in the 19th century. I would love to do an object catalogue. That is obviously something that requires time, understanding of our collections in full, money, and funding, but it's certainly something that I would love to get done. Yes, if I can track down some of the traumatized material, I'm glad, Joe, that you mentioned trauma, because the collection's trauma that Bifrons and Saar and Limminge and Ozengell have faced, it would be lovely to be able to try and improve that. So yeah, very much on my mind as a possible project.
Thank you. Dave has asked, or has said, noted that the hole in the brooch appears at the end of a crack. Was the hole put in to stop the crack propagating?
It could be. I suppose I'm not a jeweler or a craftsman, so I would want to speak to someone who works with silver and gilding and casting about whether that is possible. If Alex, I'm sure I saw Alex Reed in here somewhere, who is our student ambassador and our bronze caster. Yeah, it might be something I need to discuss with him about whether putting in a small hole would stop the crack. But it's a good question.
Rosemary asked, have there been any DNA test bones from the graves? I matched one of the skeletons on the Ramsgate Relief Road.
So the skeletons are a very good question. It was my understanding, and I believe the landowner's understanding, that most of the skeletons or all the skeletons had been reburied during the excavation or post the excavation. However, very recently, I found out that that's not entirely the case. And there is actually a skeleton up in Canterbury Christ Church University, but I don't know from which phase of the excavation it's come from. There's not very much notes, and it's something that I'm trying to inquire about. And there was no DNA studies done at the time. It wasn't, within the technological feasibility at the time. We do have some human remains in one of our parts of our collection from this site, which we are potentially going to look at getting some DNA done, again with time and funding and opportunities if they become available. So yeah, it's not been done to my knowledge, and certainly we have no record of any DNA being done on since definitely since the collection came into our possession between 2010 and 2022. I don't know whether any has been done, but it's not been included in our paperwork.
Thank you. I see that Joe has just commented here for Jules. Says it's not overspilled and hasn't shrunk in the cells either on the glass versus enamel point. There is a brooch from Bifrons a bit fancier with garnet alternating enamel, and sorry, it just moved on me. And the enamel has shrunk. Can be hard though, as enamel is an allied vitreous material to glass.
Thank you very much, Joe. That makes much more sense.
I hope that helps. I think that is all of the questions we have here, Andy. So, I want to say thank you so much for the talk. It was amazing. Really interesting. If anyone has any more questions for Andy, then drop him an email on his Kent Archaeological Society email address, which is
andy.ward@kentarchaeology.org.uk.
brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you again, Andy, for your insights on this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig.
As I mentioned earlier, our talks calendar is filling rapidly, so please keep your eyes open for upcoming talks. We have coming up Thursday, the 24th of October, Diving with a Purpose, the SS T.R. Thompson Project by Tad Tabara. This is an incredible story of the discovery of shipwreck, the SS T.R. Thompson, diving and recording the historic steamer and of the incredible connections that followed. On Thursday, the 14th of November, 2024, to coincide with the release of Gladiator 2, we have Dr. Simon Elliott telling us all things Septimius Severus. On Thursday, the 5th of December, we have the rescheduled Randall Manor Revealed, Community Archaeology Excavations in Shoreham Woods Country Park by Andrew Mayfield. Thursday, the 23rd of January, we have Dr. Reb Ellis-Hacken, and she'll be talking to us about animals and humans in the late Iron Age art of England and Wales, with a special reference to Kent. On the 21st of February, we've got David Brownrigg bringing us a presentation of technical aids in archaeology with a special focus on aerial and satellite imagery. Thursday, the 20th of March, Janice Thornton will be talking about Sheppey munitionesses, women in Sheerness Dockyard in World War I. And Thursday, the 17th of April, Dr. Martin Watts will deliver his talk, Richborough, the Secret Port. And I'm sure there will be more as they fly in. So please keep your eyes on the website for more details of the talk and a wider range of upcoming Kent-based events. So that is all for me. Thank you again, everybody. If you enjoyed it, if you like what we're doing, please think about becoming a member, and we will continue to bring these to your living room. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely evening. Thanks, Andy. And I'll see you all later. Good night.